the heat that had no off switch. Imagine waking up inside a stone room in the south of France in the middle of August. No fan, no open window, no thin cotton sheet to kick off in frustration. Just you, the heat pressing down from a roof that has been absorbing sun since dawn, and the sound of an entire household already at work in temperatures that would, by midday, exceed 40 degrees Celsius in the street outside. This was not a crisis. This was Tuesday, and the people living inside that building had solutions to the heat that were so effective, so precisely engineered into the fabric of the structure itself, that modern architects studying medieval buildings in hot climates have begun quietly borrowing from them, because in some cases they work better than anything we have designed since. The medieval world did not stumble through summer hoping for a breeze. It was built for it. The orientation of walls. How buildings were aimed like weapons against the sun. The first thing a medieval builder did when constructing a home in a warm climate was choose the right hill, not for the view, not for defense, though defense mattered, for the wind. Prevailing summer winds across the Mediterranean and the Middle East blow from predictable directions, and the builders of the medieval period knew those directions the way modern engineers know load tables. They had grown up in the landscape. They had watched which walls dried fastest after rain and which stayed damp longest. They had felt which corners of the village caught the afternoon breeze and which suffocated under still heated air from midday until well past sunset. That embodied knowledge, absorbed over a lifetime and confirmed over generations, was built directly into the orientation of every wall, every doorway, every window opening they ever placed. In the towns of medieval Andalusia in southern Spain, under both Moorish and later Christian governance, buildings were oriented with their narrowest face to the west, the direction of the most punishing afternoon sun. Streets in cities like Granada and Córdoba were deliberately kept narrow, sometimes less than 2 meters wide, not because land was scarce, but because a narrow street creates shade. The buildings on either side of a narrow street shade each other through the hottest hours of the day, keeping the street surface cool and reducing the amount of heat radiated back into the buildings from the ground. Modern urban heat island research has measured temperature differences of up to 10 degrees Celsius between narrow shaded medieval street networks and wide-open modern boulevards in the same cities. The medieval street plan was not quaint, it was thermal engineering, and at the end of those narrow shaded streets, behind the modest and often windowless exterior walls of the houses themselves, was something the street gave no indication of, something that stopped visitors in their tracks, and that still, 1,000 years later, produces the same involuntary physical response in anyone who steps into one for the first time. The courtyard, the cooling engine hidden at the heart of the house. You push open a door from the blinding heat of the street, and you step into a courtyard, and the temperature drops, not gradually, immediately, 5 degrees, sometimes 8. The air is moving gently, drawn through the space by dynamics you cannot see. There is the sound of water, a small central fountain, or simply a stone basin, or in the grandest houses a channel running the full length of the space, and that sound alone seems to lower the temperature further, though what is actually happening is measurable and real. The central courtyard, the atrium in Roman tradition, the patio in Andalusian architecture, the sarn in Islamic building, was the single most effective passive cooling technology in the medieval world. Its principle was straightforward. A courtyard open to the sky creates a pocket of enclosed air that behaves differently from the air outside it. During the day, the courtyard's high surrounding walls shade the floor and lower walls through most of the daylight hours, preventing the ground from absorbing heat. At night, the open sky allows the courtyard air to radiate its heat upward and cool rapidly. By dawn, the courtyard has become a reservoir of cool air. As the day heats the exterior of the building, that cool air is drawn slowly through the interior spaces, through doorways and window openings positioned to create crossflow, providing a sustained cooling effect that peaks in the early afternoon, precisely when the heat outside peaks with it. The Alhambra palace complex in Granada, constructed primarily in the 14th century, contains multiple courtyards designed on this principle with a precision that architectural researchers have spent decades documenting. The Court of the Myrtles, with its long central reflecting pool, maintains interior temperatures consistently 8 to 10 degrees below the exterior temperature during peak summer heat. This is not a ruin performing a shadow of its original function. This is a building doing exactly what it was designed to do, 700 years after the hands that built it have turned to dust. The pool does not merely add beauty, it adds evaporative cooling, the surface area of water releasing moisture into the air above it, which absorbs heat as it evaporates, measurably reducing the air temperature of the courtyard and everything connected to it. Water, in the medieval cooling system, was never decorative first, it was functional first and beautiful second, and the two things were considered inseparable. Thick stone walls. The thermal battery that defeated the northern heat. In northern Europe, where the problem was less about the ferocity of summer heat and more about its unpredictability, weeks of grey damp cool followed by sudden brutal heat that buildings had not been designed to anticipate, the solutions were different but equally deliberate. A wall of limestone or sandstone a meter thick will absorb the heat of a warm day across its outer surface over the course of many hours, but that heat will not reach the interior until many hours later, sometimes not until the following morning, by which point the exterior has cooled again, and the cycle reverses. The wall does not let the heat in, it delays it until the heat outside has already gone. Builders in northern France and England understood this behavior not in scientific terms, but in practical ones. They knew that north-facing rooms stayed cooler. They knew that the undercroft, the vaulted semi-subterranean ground floor of a castle, remained cool even through the warmest weeks of summer, maintained by the earth pressing against its lower walls and floor, holding a temperature close to the average annual mean, regardless of what the season above ground was doing. Documented records from English castle households of the 13th and 14th centuries show that certain activities, the storage of perishables, the preparation of certain foods, the keeping of medicines, were deliberately relocated to the undercroft during summer months. The cool was a resource, managed as carefully as fuel or grain. The great hall of a medieval northern European castle was also designed with summer in mind, though this is rarely the first thing mentioned about it. Its height, vaulting sometimes 12 or 15 meters from floor to ceiling, meant that the hot air rising from the bodies of the people inside it, from the torches and candles, from the enormous wall fireplace, rose far above the occupied zone of the room and accumulated near the ceiling, where it could exit through high louver vents or clerestory windows without significantly raising the temperature at floor level. Medieval lords did not suffer through August feasts in stifling heat by accident. They had engineered the air movement of their great halls to carry heat upward and out before it ever settled on the people below. The wind catcher, the tower that swallowed the sky and cooled the room below. In the Islamic world, whose influence on medieval European building practice through Spain, Sicily, and the Crusader states was profound and extensively documented, one piece of technology existed that represented perhaps the most sophisticated passive cooling solution of the entire medieval period. It looked, from the outside, like a tower. What it was a machine. The wind catcher, known as a malkaf in Arabic, a badhir in Persian, was a vertical shaft rising above the roofline of a building with openings positioned to face the prevailing wind. As wind struck the face of the shaft, it was directed downward through the tower into the interior of the building below, creating a constant flow of fresh-moving air through the occupied spaces. The opening at the base of the shaft could be positioned over a pool of water or a bed of wet cloth to add evaporative cooling to the incoming air before it entered the living spaces. In the most sophisticated examples, the shaft was divided into two channels, one to catch and direct the wind inward, one to draw warm, stale air out, creating a continuous ventilation cycle driven entirely by wind pressure, with no mechanical assistance of any kind. Wind catchers were in use across the Islamic world from at least the 14th century, and surviving examples in the cities of Yazd in Iran and Hyderabad in Pakistan, some of them still functioning, have been measured by environmental engineers producing interior temperature reductions of between 10 and 15 degrees Celsius compared to outside air temperature on days with adequate wind. 15 degrees from a clay tower with no moving parts and no power source. The technology so impressed modern sustainable building researchers that several 21st century architectural projects in hot climates have incorporated wind catcher principles directly, in some cases replicating medieval proportions almost exactly because the original design was already optimal. The medieval garden. The living shield planted between the house and the sun. The gardens of a medieval estate were not placed where they were because the lord wanted a pleasant view from his bedchamber window. They were placed on the south and west sides of the main building, the sides most exposed to solar heat, because a garden, properly planted, acts as a buffer between the building and the sun. Trees with large canopies intercepted direct solar radiation before it reached the walls. The evapotranspiration of a planted garden, the process by which plants draw water from the soil and release it as water vapor through their leaves, cooled the air immediately surrounding them by measurable amounts. A walled garden planted densely could reduce the air temperature on the building's exterior wall by 3 to 4 degrees on a hot afternoon. 3 or 4 degrees, maintained across the hottest hours of the day, represents a significant reduction in the heat absorbed by that wall and transmitted slowly into the interior over the following hours. Medieval monastery gardens, documented in planning records that survive from establishments including St. Gall in Switzerland, whose 9th century building plan plan is one of the most extraordinary documents of early medieval architecture, were positioned with this thermal function explicitly understood. The placement of the herb garden against the south wall, the orchard to the west, the kitchen garden arranged to receive morning sun and afternoon shade, these decisions reflected a combined understanding of horticultural and thermal requirements that the same plan satisfied simultaneously. What they knew that we forgot, and why we are learning it again. There is something worth sitting with at the end of all of this. The people who built these cooling systems, the Andalusian builders who calculated street widths by their shadow angles, the Persian engineers who designed wind catchers that are still outperforming modern mechanical systems on certain metrics, the northern European castle builders who trusted thick stone walls to buffer the heat of a summer day against the cool of the night. None of them had thermometers. None of them had airflow simulation software or thermal imaging or any of the measurement tools that modern building science considers basic. They had observation. They had the memory of every summer that had come before. They had the feedback of bodies that knew when they were too hot and structures that had been refined over generations toward the single goal of keeping those bodies cool. Modern sustainable architecture, under pressure from rising energy costs and a changing climate to produce buildings that do not require mechanical cooling to remain habitable, has spent the last 30 years rediscovering what medieval builders knew without being told. Thermal mass, passive ventilation, evaporative cooling, courtyard design, strategic planting. These are not ancient ideas being given modern names. They are solutions that were arrived at through centuries of careful iteration and then abandoned for 100 years, while cheap energy made abandoning them financially painless. That window is closing, and the buildings that were designed before it ever opened are still standing in the heat of a Granada afternoon, their courtyards cool, their fountains turning air into relief, their walls doing exactly what they were built to do. They did not need electricity. They needed understanding, and the understanding was always there. Cut into the stone, planted in the garden, drawn down through the tower and into the room where someone 700 years ago sat in the shade and was simply not too hot.